It's weighing in, NJ.com's high school wrestling podcast. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to weighing in, NJ.com's high school wrestling podcast. This is the grand finale. We've done it. We've completed another season of New Jersey high school wrestling. The state tournament has been completed. We have our 14 boys state champions. And, if the wrestling season was a television show, the 3 days at Boardwalk Hall was like a 3-part, season finale. We had a lot of twists and turns, some plot lines, wrapped up as expected, but plenty others certainly did not. So we're going to dive into all of that, put a bow on the 2025-2026 season, and look ahead to some of the things we're looking forward to next year. I'm Bob Batters, your host as always here on Weighing In, joined by our NJ.com wrestling reporters live from Cleveland. Bill Evans there for the NCAA Division I championship. So you hear some loud stuff going on. That's Bill over there at Rocket Arena. Joe Dallas, Ryan Patty, and Jake Afariat. So the season is in the books, and we're going to talk about it right here. So a lot of surprises in Atlantic City. Some great stuff came out of all 3 days. And we'll start off right at the top. The Cinderella story of them all, a number 20 seed winning the state title, and one of the more remarkable storylines, probably the most remarkable storyline of the whole weekend. And that was Delsey senior Grayson Pettit winning his first state medal and becoming a state champion. Just an incredible run, captivated all of us, from Thursday all the way, on through Saturday afternoon. And, Bill and Jake, Bill, that's your guy. That's your area down there. Jake, you covered that final. That was something, from his semifinal or quarterfinal victory, I believe, or the number 1 seed all the way through to the championship. Just, an all-time run from Grayson Pettit.
Yeah, beat Colton Haggerty, who from Washington Township, who was a 2-time state medalist, beat Richard DiLorenzo from Times River East, a state medalist in a fantastic overtime match that, crazy scramble. And then obviously the big win, over Sammy Spalding by a point in the semifinals. Spalding from Camden Catholic, was a state champion a year ago, and then just dominated Anthony DeAndrea of Watchung Hills in the final. I mean, at that point, he was so hot that, there was nobody stopping him. And, look, he was seeded 21st. We felt that he was underseeded. We did have him ranked 8th going into the tournament, so we felt he could be on the podium. Certainly, he had a very difficult draw and managed that, and it was one of the great runs in state history in my mind, just because of the guys he beat. But, just a matter of him last year tearing his ACL before districts and not having that previous advancement criteria. And then this year just not getting to face some of those guys. He did face Spalding, lost a close decision, did face DiLorenzo, lost a close decision, but, didn't get to face Haggerty in the dual meet because of some strategy, didn't get to face some of those guys that escaped the rock because they got cut down to 1 day, and that made it a difficult path for him. But he certainly, lived up to everything that he and his coaches thought that he could do. And that we thought he could do to an extent. I think, we were only surprised in the sense of, beating the defending state champ that we thought was a pretty high favorite, and some of those other guys to win, 4 straight against that quality of competition was an all-time performance by Grayson Pettit.
Yeah, and, the thing that I took away from that, and, like you said, I covered that final, it was funny. He, obviously a lot was made of Grayson's seed, and, he didn't think much of it. And he said, that his coach, Kurt DeWood, he said, seeds only matter if you don't plan on winning. And, I think that proved absolutely true. I mean, I think, like Bill said, we all knew he was better than a 21 seed. He only took 5 losses all year, all of which he avenged, and he was confident. I mean, listen, he and people can say, obviously with the benefit of hindsight being 2020, that now it was well placed. But, if you talk to him, you might think, well, this guy, tore his ACL. He was a state wrestleback 2, his only time that, he made it down to AC. You wouldn't have pegged him, to go on this run. But for him, there was never any doubt otherwise that, he would do this. And, the thing for me is, he just said, like, he constantly believed in himself. And, we hear that all the time. But, that self-belief, I think, for him, rang true and wasn't just sort of hollow and a cliche. I think for him, he, took his seed in stride. He knew he was better than that and knew what he was capable of. And, the other thing, too, that I think is, is important to mention with LC is they're strong in that part of the lineup. So, he has great practice partners in the room, in Amari Van, in, Anthony DePaul and, Dante DePaul and all those guys. And so I think, that probably helped and played a factor too. You're not going to find many better, stretches of 3, 4, 5 guys in a row than them. And, they were all either medalists or, made fairly deep runs. So I think it was kind of a perfect storm for Grayson Pettit. And that's not to take anything away from him at all. But, I think everything kind of broke just right. And he peaked at absolutely the right time. And, he said, he wants to wrestle in college. And I asked him, if he had gotten any offers yet. And he said he hadn't. And I told him that might change pretty soon. So, we'll see where he ends up wrestling.
And then one of the most anticipated finals was at 120 pounds. A 2-time state champ versus return state champ. And Ryan, that one lived up to the billing with an absolutely thrilling ending. And now we're going to go into a next year on watch for some potential history.
Yeah, Cam Sance wins an absolutely epic final against JoJo Burke. And, I would have ended it with that match. It was the second to last match of the night, but I thought it was absolutely fantastic. And, you were looking forward to it the whole year. You saw those two ranked 1 and 2 in our rankings and a lot of other rankings the whole season. And you were just looking forward to it. And that's what we got. Crazy first period scramble there. I thought Sance had 3, but they waved it off at the very end there. And then, really good ride in the second period, followed by more in the third. And then you had, actually both kids escaped, in the second and third period. But then you had overtime, 1-1, 7-point move by Sance, where it looked like Sance was going to get taken to his back by Burke, but he wrestled through it and comes away with a 7-point move, and just an absolutely epic final. And like you said, Bob, we get the chance potentially next year to see some history. He's going to go try to go 4 for 4, right? We'll see where he ends up weight wise. Is he going to have to wrestle Paul Kenny? Is he not? Is he going to have to wrestle Coluccio, or is he not? Coluccio was his last in-state loss. That was when those two were a freshman. Really, really fascinating final. And then you had at 157, I'll just touch on 2 more finals here. 157, you had the final that I thought we were going to get. It was Joey Canova over Joey Monticello, 2 kids kind of making up for lost time. Canova did not wrestle at all his sophomore year, and he missed the state tournament last year due to a torn ACL and meniscus. He was the 9 seed. I at least like the matchup that he had with Cage Jones coming in. Cage, obviously a stud, puts kids to his back, takes kids down, but Canova's kind of a short and stocky kid, tough to bring down, tough to fend off shots against him. And he put together one of the best tournaments and one of the best stories in the tournament. I don't think he trusted his knee, when he lost to Trevor Jones and when he lost to Ryan Mitchell. I think that he just had to get, a little more experience under his belt this season, just some matches under his belt. And he got those matches in, and he ended up making a great run. And the Princeton commit has an incredible end to his high school career. And then at 175, much like Sance and Burke, you had a really good final that we were all looking forward to once both kids were on the mat and healthy, and that was Santino Rodriguez and Gabe Logan. Santino Rodriguez was healthy the whole season. That was different from his first 3 seasons. He had the shoulder injury the first 3 seasons that costed him a chance last year and the year before. Well, last year he was somewhat healthy, but the year before and his freshman year, he medically forfeited. And then sophomore year, he didn't wrestle at all in the state tournament because he was hurt. So, and Bob, you said he was one of the more underrated kids really all season, flew under the radar as one of the more dominant pound for pound kids in the state. And Gabe Logan, once you saw him healthy, he came back from his knee injury. He put together an amazing postseason. But Santino Rodriguez just coming through in the end there. I know there was some chirping that was done before that final, and Santino Rodriguez heard all of it and he put together a fantastic tournament. So those are the 3 finals that I thought. I mean, I was blown away with all three finals.
And the Shore Conference had one of its best seasons it's had ever, and in a long time. The Shore had 6 state champs overall, most since it had 7 in 2008, which was a historic year for the conference. Paul Kenny, the Christian Brothers Academy Junior, rolled to the title in 126 pounds, won by fall over Del Barton's Tommy Marchetti in the final. And we talked about it all season. Paul Kenny just dominant, scoring 1 million points, and that was exactly what happened down in Boardwalk Hall. And then Rumston Fairhaven Jr. Sonny Amato, after losing last season, taking third, losing the semis, taking third, and being pretty down about it, he won his 2nd state title with a shutout win over Del Barton's Nick Schwartz. He was pretty emotional afterwards. Head to NJ.com, read all about it there. So a triumphant return for Sonny Amato. But 3 wrestlers that we're going to touch on right here that broke through. We'll start with Killian Coluccio of Lacey. Coluccio, if you look at his body of work coming into the season, he's been right there. And he's in the state tournament coming into the season. He had only ever lost to state champions. His freshman year, he lost to Cam Sant in the semifinals, went on to take third at 106 pounds. Last season, he reached the state final, lost 4-3 to JoJo Burke at the 106-pound final. This year, he finally breaks through, gets the championship match, and he wins 7-2 over 7-1, over St. Joe's Charles Esposito. He wins the 113-pound state title. So the Virginia Tech commit, he breaks through. Lacey's first state champion since 1997. He's got a 3rd, a 2nd, and a 1st to his resume. And Joe, as the season went on, he just got better and better. He wrestles with an aggressive and, dare we say, mean style. And in the final, he came out of on top of a couple scrambles and got those takedowns, and away he went. Joe, you got to unmute there.
He is a nice, polite, cordial kid off the mat. You do not want to be in his crosshairs in the circle, though. Aggressive, physical, and what really impresses me is he capitalizes on opportunities. He doesn't miss open shots. He doesn't, come up short on turns. I think he's going to be a really fine college wrestler. And the other thing is he's really motivated. I can't see him taking his foot off the gas going into next season, Bob.
No, I think now that he's got the taste of it and, he knows what he has to put in to get to the top, I think we'll see, a wrestler that can potentially just, reach even another level after that, which would be impressive considering how well he's wrestled. And, Ryan touched on it before. Who knows who's going to be in that weight class? It could be, him battling with Cam Sant. Sant's going for that 4th title. So those lightweights are always interesting because the depth of the standouts there. And, that'll be a fun one to watch there as well. And then another kid who broke through, who's been one of the best in the state last couple of years. And this season was ranked number 1 at 2 different weight classes and finished off as a 215-pound state champion. That's Howell Jr. Tanner Hodgins, the Oklahoma State commit. That was the big talk late in the regular season, or the team season, I should say. And then it was official once the district tournaments were seeded. Hodgins going from 190 up to 215. And, it didn't take long to see that he was the guy to beat there. And that's the way it ended up. In the final, he drops a 20 spot on Mount Olive. Nico Gonzalez wins 20-7, wins the state title, and he just looked awesome. He really is. He said it to me after a semifinal win, and he's right. The pressure and the pace that he puts on at that weight class is just too much for kids to handle. And you can hold him off maybe for a little bit in the first period, but by the time the third period comes around, it's just he's relentless. I liken it to a power running game. Maybe you get some stops early in the first half, but once that 4th quarter comes, it's hard to stop. And Tanner Hodgins was excellent, from start to finish. So I know you were impressed. You got to see him at district and regions, and a great kid. We love talking to him, but he was awesome at Boardwalk Hall.
He was phenomenal. We thought maybe he would struggle or be pressed a little bit at 215, which we all thought was the deepest or one of the deepest in the tournament. And it was just man against boys. And I'll tell you another thing that was interesting. On Saturday, he weighed in at 204. So, we asked him about, you're going to be back at 215 next year. And he was saying that he didn't think he was going to grow enough to be a heavyweight. We all know he's going to wrestle some bouts at heavyweight during the regular season, but He talked about what he wants to do in the off season. He wants to be on the world team again. He is highly driven, and I wrote the story, and during the course of the year, he has an endless supply of energy. And the Hal coaching staff has a tag team match every practice. Okay, it's your turn to go wrestle Tanner. It's your turn to go wrestle Tanner. And, I just think he's going to get better and better and better. He does a lot of things well. He really dogs his opponents. Even if he gets a shot and he can't get him done, he scrambles after him. He is truly relentless when it comes to his style of wrestling. And I think he's really much stronger than he looks, Bob.
Yeah, like you said, he stalks his opponent. He's low in that stance. He keeps the pressure on, and we saw it just wears those guys down. He's lightning quick. You see him with those low leg attacks, and it's just so hard for every 215 pounder he wrestled to defend. I mean, he was dominant. No one really gave him a close match there. And then the fourth.
Let's remember, Bob, he pinned a heavyweight who was 284 pounds.
Yeah,
and he was wrestling 90.
You're right. A lot stronger than he looks. And somebody said it was Long Branch head coach Billy George saw him down in the staging area, and he said, Tanner Hodges and David Taylor is going to be a scary combination. And I do not disagree. So we got one more year to watch him wrestle, but yeah, we expect big things from him once he gets to Oklahoma State. And another wrestler from the shore winning the first title, Thomas Blewett from Middletown North, the junior. 106 was a minefield all season, but in the end, it was Thomas Blewett. He ended the season 50-1, which might be the state single season record for wins. We haven't been able to confirm that, but we think it is. Blewett won 10-4 over Paulsboro's Will Cruz in the final. Again, Thomas Blewett, outside of that really random and shocking loss on that final Saturday, right before team states, when they picked up a quad and he was, pinned by Ramsey's Garrett Bunnigan. If that doesn't happen, we're talking about a 51-0 season, and probably talking about him a little bit more. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. 106 was really good all season. It was a very deep weight class, and in the end, he came out on top. Bill, you wrote that story about Thomas Blewett, that 106-pound final, and again, he was really good, and he didn't have. It was oddly enough, the 1 and 2 seats did meet in the final there. Blewett looked really, really good.
Yeah, he dominated the whole tournament. I think every win was by a major or close to it. Obviously, had a heck of a final against Will Cruz, which was a great story. Him and his sister Shayna both making the finals as number one seeds. Blewett, he was pretty high in our rankings all year. He got up near the top and then had that little hiccup, and I said at that point we might have thought he was the fourth guy, not in the state, but maybe from the shore. When you look at John Tarantino and Jonas Lusker, Santino Edgar, but he wrestled real well on the bottom half. Will Cruz took advantage of a pretty good draw there. After finishing third in the region and second in districts, and got himself to the state final. And like you said, interesting that it was 1 and 2, because 106, kind of like 125 in college, it's that weight class that you never know what's going to happen. It's always chaotic. He talked about, talking to Tyler Klinsky this week, who's here in Cleveland, trying to become an All-American this weekend. And and Tyler told him, just go get it, go get what's yours. And he went and got what was his. And was just tremendous, and obviously he'll have another year left to try to win another one. But it was a great season and really a phenomenal state tournament for him.
And then lastly, right here, Christian Brothers had 2 state champions for the first time in program history. Paul Kenny, obviously, and then Bobby Duffy, the Iowa-bound senior. He won the 144-pound title victory over Ryan DeGeorge of Del Barton. He hit a big move in the first period, put DeGeorge to his back, wasn't able to finish the fall, but he cruised from there. And Bobby Duffy just had an awesome year. I mean, this is a kid that broke through as a junior to finish 5th in the state after being a blood rounder as a freshman, and then wrestled back 3 as a sophomore. And he was able to just refine his game just enough and tweak it just a little to get on top of the podium. And he's a super aggressive wrestler. And I was joking all weekend. I said he'll cradle a Dippin' Dots lady, on the concourse. He can pin anybody. He can cradle anybody. He'll throw cement mixers. He's a high flying guy. He can scramble, but he toned it down just a little bit to where he wasn't reckless and didn't get caught in situations. And Bobby Duffy was really, really good. I think he's going to be a guy, Jake, that is a fan favorite in Carver Hawkeye Arena just because of the potential for fireworks that he can produce. And I think we saw that in the state final against Ryan DeGeorge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, listen, anytime you can, beat a state champ and a 3-time state finalist, it certainly puts you on the radar. And it's funny, he said to me afterward, he said, if you told 8th grade me that I'd only be a 1-time state champ, I'd be pretty disappointed. And, I said, oh, he's a pretty tough critic then, because a lot of kids would kill for one, and especially the way that he won his first, who it was against. And, I kind of likened him to a chameleon insofar as like his style blends in well with kind of everything. He can win close decisions if he has to and grind them out. Like you said, Bob, he can hit big moves and, he can, get those, big back points or bonus points when he needs to. And I think that makes him particularly dangerous. And, the other thing too is, he wrestled DeGeorge 3 times over the last 2 years and he's beaten him each time. He pinned him last year in Powerade, beat him 6-2 this year in the Catholic duels, and then again by bonus in the state final. And, when you have that familiarity with somebody, it can be a double-edged sword. But I just think, Duffy had DeGeorge figured out this whole time. He sort of knew that he was the favorite. He said, like, he always finds a way to rise to the occasion. I think clearly he did that, last year, when he took 5th, he said he was disappointed in himself. He thought he should have done better. Coach Billy Ashnault said, that he's able to wrestle through any position and that makes him particularly dangerous. And he's joining a cadre of guys out in Iowa City that, include Sonny Amato, Harvey Ludington, a bunch of shore guys. And so, I think that, I don't know if he's going to start right away next year there, or if they'll redshirt him. But if you watched him this year, I mean, I think I looked, he gave up 4 points the entire postseason, including in bouts where, he notched a fall and was leading. And, when you can do that and, your defense is so stingy, and you're so tough to score on, it doesn't matter how you win, you're going to find ways to win. And so, I think that made him super interesting, super exciting. Now, obviously that'll be a big hole for CBA to replace next year. And especially the manner in which Duffy goes about his business. Again, if they're, going to replace him with a kid who's eking out 3-1 or 5-2 decisions, maybe things look a lot different for them. But, I think certainly, for all the talk of, the Kenny brothers there recently and, Santino Edgar, it might seem crazy to say, but it seems like Duffy almost flew a little bit under the radar, not that people didn't know how good he was, but that he wasn't, the main talk of CBA when we talked about them this year. And I think, whether he cared about that or not, I think now for good reason, we're all forced to talk about him and really acknowledge, what a season he had.
Completely agree. And just another note on CBA's other state champion, Paul Kenny, first 2-time state champion in Christian Brothers Academy history. Dominant he was, certainly. And in 11 postseason bouts, he won by technical fall or pin in every single bout. So an impressive run to the final. The other champs, 138 pounds, Gideon Gonzalez, a sophomore from Bergen Catholic, defeated Brian Little in the final. 165. We'll get to that a little bit more in depth, but to no surprise, Delbarton's Jaden James, the number 1 ranked wrestler in the country at 165. Penn State commit, finishes off a perfect season, wins his second state title. At 190, Delbarton's CJ Betts defeated Nevin Matesic of Don Bosco Prep. And then at heavyweight, it was Christian Alvarez from St. Joe's defeating Mateo Vinciguerra from Woodstown to win at 285. So surprises, we'll talk next. There were plenty of those. Certainly Grayson Pettit leads the discussion in that, but we've already touched on that. One that I wanted to mention was at 165. I mean, the foregone conclusion was Jaden James. So it was really, who's he going to wrestle in the final? And, the chalk would be either the 2 seed or the 3 seed. The 2 seed was Reed Clossy from West Essex. The 3 seed was Jay Clayton from Point Pleasant Borough. They had wrestled twice during the season, with Clossy winning both times, but very close, 1 point and 2 points. So a lot of us anticipated that to be that semifinal. It wasn't. Instead, the guy that reached the final was St. John Vianney Jr. Ryan Bubba Gavrish, the Columbia commit. Went on a great run, had 2 really tight wins. He won in sudden victory over Clayton in the quarterfinals, and then a 1-0 win over Clossy in the semifinals. And Gavrish was a guy who missed a good chunk of the season. He was out from Beast of the East till sometime in February, early February. He had a UCL injury, which was interesting. I talked to him after his quarterfinal win. He's had 3 partial UCL tears, and for someone who doesn't throw a baseball for a living, that really was surprising to me. But once it happened at Beast of the East, kind of knew what it was, knew what the rehab would be. Wasn't really worried about getting back. But he was kind of that dark horse guy. I don't know if anyone expected him to make the run, but I also don't know if we're really surprised that he did. But just a great job there by Gavrish getting to the final. He's now a 2-time state medalist, and I think, Joe, the expectations rise certainly for him going into his senior year. If he can stay healthy, we see how tough he is. He's really hard to score points on, and he just wrestles with a ton of grit.
Well, he's so long. He knows how to use leverage. As you mentioned, very defense oriented. He doesn't give up points. He contests everything. He's good against leg attacks. He stays out of ties, and when he gets his opportunity, he scores. So, I think he's got a great future again if he can stay healthy. And the elbow thing, let's face it, if you're going to be hurt in wrestling, shoulders, elbows, knees, and hips are the places you can't be hurt and be successful, Bob.
Yeah. So it's a credit to him, the fact that he was able to battle through that. And he said it's probably going to be something he has to deal with his entire career, but he learned to manage it. And, you just hope he doesn't miss, significant time, certainly next year. And then, once he jumps up to the college ranks. We talked about 215, what Tanner Hodgins did, but his opponent in the final was, certainly qualifies as a surprise. That's a loaded weight, a deep weight. And Nico Gonzalez just had an awesome tournament to get to that championship bout, Ryan.
Yeah, he was sensational, and Jake's had the chance to talk to him multiple times this year. But I'll say this about Nico Gonzalez. I'm not surprised at all with what he did. I know Sal Marquez was kind of that bugaboo for him, was always that hump he couldn't get over, but found a way to do it. I thought that, there were times where, if Tanner Hodgins wasn't in this weight class, if you told me that Nico Gonzalez was going to win a state championship, I would have nodded my head. I would have told you, okay. I wouldn't have been surprised by that. But I'll say this as well. He's going to East Stroudsburg. He was at first committed to Long Island University. With all due respect to East Stroudsburg, he should be wrestling somewhere Division I incredible. That kid has absolutely earned his stripes. He has made such a big leap on the mat. You could even go back to last year when he medaled. Just the leap from his sophomore to junior year, and then junior year to this year. He's been sensational. That kid should be wrestling at a Power 4 school. He is the real deal. Great at putting kids to his back. Great at tilting kids, getting takedowns, teching kids. He can score a lot of points. He's been awesome this year. He was a pleasure to watch the last 2 years.
And Jake, as Ryan said, you're really familiar with him. I got to talk to him after his semifinal win over Dante DeLuca, the number 1 seed who's undefeated. And I came away extremely impressed. Yeah, I was saying to you guys, I said, that might be the final with the 2 nicest kids in there, with Nico Gonzalez and Tanner Hodgins. And, Jake, that was one of your teams that you followed throughout the season. And I think you're going to echo Ryan's sentiments and say that you weren't too surprised either.
Yeah, no, not at all. And yeah, I mean, what a nice kid. It always seems like, obviously a lot of nice kids in this sport, but the upper weights always, seem to, be,
gentle giants.
Exactly, wolves in sheep's clothing. I think the thing for me, because I even talked to Nico at the Sam Cali back in December, and he was disappointed that Sal Marquez from Delsey and Rocco Salerno from Seton Hall Prep bowed out of that field with injury and weren't there, because he was looking forward to wrestling them. And, Coach Sean Smythe told me then, he's like, the fact that they can split the squad and send kids to the Mustang or send kids to the Cali or whatever it might be is perfect for guys like him, Cole Rebels, whomever it might be. And yeah, Nico, I think all season has been somebody who, again, we talked about, and, we said, okay, if everything breaks right, maybe he could make a run. I don't know that any of us necessarily pegged him beating DeLuca, the way he did. But, given that it happened, now with hindsight, I don't think anybody should be surprised. And, the other thing that's impressive about Mount Olive is, since 2022, so the last, 4 or 5 years, they've had 7 state medalists in the upper weights. So they know what they're doing up there. And, if you're a vaunted upper weight from, Morris County in that area, you got to find a way to get yourself to Flanders, because clearly they have something working. Gonzalez was 4th last year, obviously 2nd this year, one of only a few multi-time state medalists in program history. So for him, I think the key, again, was not that he got lucky, not that, he fell on an easy side of the bracket, because he didn't. I think the key was, this is a kid who is every bit as talented as everybody else in this weight, and he went out and showed it.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And then another one I wanted, we touched on 106. We'll hit on that again real quick. 106, again, such a deep weight. It's funny because the number 1 and number 2 seeds ended up meeting the final, and that was a surprise to us. I think if we were all talking about which weight wouldn't have 1 versus 2, it would be 106. So that's kind of part of the unpredictability. I mean, our final regular season, or before the state tournament, the rankings, 6 of those guys medaled, 2 did not. So the 2 different ones who medaled that weren't in our rankings were Will Cruz of Paulsboro and Forrest Rose of Immaculata. The 2 that didn't medal that were in were John Tarantino of Red Bank Catholic and Rocco Caputo of Cedar Grove. And that just goes back to what we were saying all season. We think there's probably 10 to 12 guys that are legitimate medal contenders, and obviously not all of those, are going to get on to the podium. So, 106 ends up that way. And I think we'd be remiss. Again, so many crazy things happen, especially that Thursday. We kept looking around and we're like, what is going on here? I think at one point Jake was like, make it stop. We don't have enough time to write about all these things. But you go to 126 pounds, and what Nicholas Campanelli, the sophomore from St. Thomas Aquinas, did was just incredible. He's down 6-2 early. He's the 31 seed. You figure, okay, here we go. He's going to get, taken down. He's going to either, lose by tech fall or pin or something like that. No, he sticks Southern's Anthony Mason, the number 2 seed. The place goes berserk. We're all trying to figure out what happened. Then he does it again in the quarterfinals against Last Joyce of Camden Catholic, in the pre-quarterfinals to get the quarterfinals. He doesn't medal, but Joe, you spoke with him afterwards. What an amazing story, and what an amazing, early round run for Nicholas Campanelli.
Yeah, and when I talked to his coach said, he goes, if you're looking at it, a 21 beat and a 2, yes, that was a surprise. But his coach also said, if you're looking about it, was I surprised that kid beat the number 2 seed? He said, absolutely not. He said, the kid puts the time in. He's just dangerous enough. And, and he's one of those kids that never gives up. And, so many times you get a kid who finds himself up against a 1, a 2, a 3rd seed, and they just are defeated before they go out there. And he went out and just said, I don't care what you're seeded. You put your singlet on the same way I do. I'm going to go out and beat you. And he did. And then he followed that up, Bob.
Yeah, amazing. And the crazier even part is we didn't know about it until you went and talked down to their head coach, Louis Philippe, former Long Branch wrestler that we covered. This is a kid that had to have emergency surgery, Joe, to save his season about a month ago.
Yeah, he had gallbladder surgery and wasn't sure he was going to be back in time. But, he endured it. He gutted it out in the districts and regions and felt like he had something to prove. And, well, he certainly proved it to us.
And segueing into that, the surprises that come out of the state tournament are not only the wrestlers that reach the podium or make unexpected runs, it's also the guys who didn't medal that we thought were for sure medalists. And, we'll start right off the top with Anthony Mason there, because we're talking about Nicholas Campanelli, the big upset. I mean, Mason was a 2-time state medalist. He was a state finalist as a sophomore, 4th in the state last season, going to Bucknell. He's been a part of 4 state championship teams. He's been a great wrestler, great kid. I've been fortunate enough to talk to him, a bunch of times over the years, but when he gets upset there, right away in the prelims to the 31 seed, the road back, it just becomes incredibly daunting. And, he made it all the way back to the blood round. But you could kind of see he didn't have anything left in the tank. I mean, he had a huge, grueling victory over St. John Vianney's Matt Gould at Wrestleback 3. I mean, that's a pair of 2-time state medalists in the 3rd round of Wrestlebacks, just fighting tooth and nail, just to have a chance to try to get on the podium. Mason ended up coming out on top of that. But then he had to go up against Mikey Bautista from St. Joe's. And like I said, it seemed like he was running on fumes, lost by technical fall, and, didn't medal there. So that was certainly a stunning one. And then, Bill, I think we have to go to you and, what happened at 157. Ryan talked about Joey Canova coming through, but, Cage Jones was the number 1 seed. He's been tripped up a couple times. We thought this was the year he was really, going to put it together, win a state title. That didn't. Not only did that not happen, he finished off the medal stand completely, which I think is one of the more shocking developments from the entire tournament.
Yeah, I mean, look, he lost that tremendous quarterfinal to Joey Canova, 13-10 in overtime. I truly believe that had he won that match, he would have won the state title. Because I thought that was, and we kind of talked about it a little bit before, that was going to be the toughest matchup for him. And look, sometimes, I mean, especially you're a senior, and he's been close a number of times. When you lose and your dream has been crushed, it's really hard to get back up. Some kids can do it and some can't. I actually wrote today for the NCAAs about Mark Anthony McGowan from Princeton, who lost his 2nd round match last year in the final second and then got knocked out the next round instead of wrestling back. And him and his coach both admitted, like, he just couldn't get refocused on it. I think that's what happened with Cage. I mean, I just think he came there. It was state championship or bust. You lose in the quarters and you don't even get that night, right? I mean, they kind of sleep on it. He had to come back and wrestle a few hours later, just after the break. I mean, he got a couple hours, but I just think that's what happened. I just think that, he had everything set after you've been 2nd and 3rd. It wasn't that important to him to be 3rd again. He just couldn't get refocused on it. Like I said, had he won the match, I think he would have gone on to win it all. But, he's been a great wrestler, and maybe one of the better ones that haven't won a state title. He's going on the Rider. I think that's a good place for him. I think he'll do well there. They'll really keep on him and get him to, maybe realize his potential. He's a funky wrestler. I mean, when you're 6'4" and 157 pounds, you have a lot of leverage and you give people a lot of problems. But there's also some drawbacks to that. You can be shot on a little easier. He's gone to his back at times. And I think that's just what happened, but still a great career for him. And I think that quarterfinal match just took everything out of him mentally and physically.
And then, 190 pounds, a wrestler that was, intriguing to us all season. That's Levi Foote, from Southern Regional. He was a blood rounder as a sophomore. And we looked at 190 and thought he had a really good chance to make a strong run. But it just didn't work out for him. I mean, he got to the quarterfinals where he lost to Jaden Simpson of Camden Catholic. And then in the blood round, he lost to True DiGiuseppe of Vernon. And that's kind of a combo thing there. Foote, surprisingly, thought he was a podium candidate. Still had a very good year, but obviously you're going to know he's disappointed reaching the blood round. And on the other side of that, Ryan DiGiuseppe, I know you wrote about him. I got a chance to see him at Region 1. He was Vernon's first state qualifier since 2007, became their first state medalist since 2007 as well. So, a little bit of a surprise, kind of both ways. Foote not making the podium and then DiGiuseppe getting on top.
Yeah, I mean, what an amazing story. I put something out last night on it. That's a long, long drought. You don't see, droughts really that big. And it was a down year for Sussex County as a whole. Kittatinny got shut out, Newton, Sparta. High Point only brought one kid, and Gavin Miracle, he lost in the 3rd round of Wrestleback. So, Sussex County, besides Pope John, it was kind of a down year. Another surprise, St. Peter's actually got shut out of the semifinals. The main kid being Josh Paparo. He lost in the quarterfinals with injury time to Morgan Schwartz. It's a shame for Josh, who has really dealt with injuries throughout his high school career. He had the shoulder last year that kept him out. He lost in wrestlebacks. Same thing happens here. He had to medically forfeit out of the tournament. So he's only got 1 year left. You really want to see a kid like him go and make the podium, and he hasn't done it yet. But I'm sure he's going to come out firing next year. He's a Beast of the East finalist, and he showed that when he's healthy, he's the real deal. And then Robbie Rodriguez, another kid I was surprised to not see make it. He was a blood rounder last year. And Luke Stemkowski, we did pretty well with our Indy rankings, our final Indy rankings. A lot of those kids who we picked in the final Indy rankings got to the podium. I want to say it was almost an 80% conversion rate. One of the kids I was surprised who didn't medal was Luke Stemkowski at 157. Had a big win over Ryan Mitchell coming into the postseason in that region final at Region 1. But he's another kid with 1 year left, so he's going to get his chance. That's a 2012 drought. Dan Ressler was the last person. I went to high school with Dan Ressler, so it's been a while for Pascagoula Valley, but he'll have his chance. Stemkowski, that is. They have some other kids back too. So, a couple surprises there.
And then we also had 12 girls state champions crowned. We'll hit on two of those right now. A huge one came at the 126-pound weight class. The sophomore from Roselle Park, Lucia Ranieri, ended a 73-year state title drought for Roselle Park, became Roselle Park's first state champion, since the 50s, since Joe Yeats won the 157-pound title in 1953. She won 7-0 over Kingsway's Reagan Roxas. A huge moment for a small town that has a proud wrestling tradition. But as I said, it's been a while since they've had an individual state champ. They gave her the full champions treatment coming home, honored her that following day. So really cool moment for her and Roselle Park. And she's only a sophomore, so I think, we can expect big things to come from her in the future. Jake, you covered that match and got to talk to her afterwards.
Yeah, and her and Roxas have developed, quite the little rivalry. They wrestled last year in the semifinals. Roxas won, I think it was 6-3, prevented Ranieri from wrestling in the final. Then they wrestled, I think, 2 or 3 times this year. I know Ranieri had beat her. I think it was in the semis of the Lady Minuteman at Elizabeth. And then, again, in the state final. And, she got in on a shot quick or early in, the first period. Couldn't finish. It took her about a minute finally to get the 3, to go up 3-0 with, I think it was 16 seconds left. And, from there, she never looked back. I mean, she was utterly dominant that whole match. And the cool thing for me was, obviously, yes, obviously great what happened in her match, but, Del Barton assistant coach Craig Frost, who was a 3-time state medalist at Roselle Park. He took 3rd twice and 5th once. He was in the corner for Ranieri for that state final, along with Roselle Park head coach Ryan Rooney. And he, I think, almost more than her, was visibly kind of emotional and moved to tears about what he had just witnessed. And he said, for as great as it is guiding all those, Del Barton wrestlers to state titles, he said this one meant as much, if not more, because, he grew up with Ranieri. He's known her since she was born. And these are, the small towns that this sport makes its lifeblood on, whether it's, Paulsboro, whether it's Roselle Park, whatever it might be. I mean, Roselle Park is one of only 3 programs, I think, in state history, along with Phillipsburg and Paulsboro, to have 1,000 dual meet wins. So, this isn't just any program that we're talking about. And to end a 70-plus year, state title drought is a sight to behold. And again, she was supremely confident going in. She said, yeah, I know. Yeah, she knows what I'm going to do. Yeah, I know what she's going to do. But she said, I know I'm the better wrestler. And, she went out and backed up that talk. And, I think if you're, a fan of Roselle Park, if you're a fan of, small school wrestling, there's a lot to be optimistic about. And clearly, we could be looking at, one of the next, great girls wrestlers here.
Yeah, she was really fired up after that win, and that was a very cool moment on that center mat at Boardwalk Hall. And then the other big story to come out of the girls' finals, what happened on the mat in the 152-pound final was not surprising at all. High Points Ella Palillo hit a headlock, pinned Penn Sawkins, Fatina Lozier, and won by fall pretty quickly. But afterwards, really took everyone by surprise. Certainly our girls wrestling lead writer, Mike Holcomb. Palillo, the number one ranked 152 pounder in the country, just kind of casually dropped afterwards to Mike that she's probably not going to wrestle her senior year. She's going to focus on, freestyle, entering college opens and whatnot. And that's certainly a shocking development because, if she changed her mind, but we're going to assume that, she's true to her word and doesn't wrestle next season. If she did, she was going in as the overwhelming favorite to win a 4-state title at whatever weight class she was at. So that was a huge development. She's as dominant as we've seen boys or girls in a very long time. Just a foregone conclusion. You almost forget she's there because you just assume, oh yeah, Ella Palillo is going to win and win pretty quickly. So, she wins her 3rd state title, but the bigger news was that she's probably not going to wrestle next season. So if that was the last time we see Ella Palillo at Boardwalk Hall, man, what a career. Just incredibly dominant and certainly early in the history of girls wrestling New Jersey, but she's right up there as one of the greatest of all time and one of the pioneers of the sport. All right. Now we're going to move on to a topic we were talking about a lot, when we were sitting up there finishing up our final stories and walking out of Boardwalk Hall, and that was the Most Outstanding Wrestler Award. It went to Del Barton's Jaden James, and on the surface, yeah, how can you argue that? Jaden James, number one in the country at 165, Penn State commit, won his 2nd state title, just completely dominated the competition with, 2 pins, 2 tech falls, then another pin in the final. His last 2 seasons, you can put those up against anyone in state history as far as how dominant he was. The flip side of that is Grayson Pettit had an all-time run. And I think a lot of us up there on press row, as soon as he won that final and beat Watchung Hill's Anthony DeAndre, we all looked at each other and said, yep, there's the MOW. So I think that brings up an interesting discussion in terms of what is the OW? And it's really in the eye of the beholder. Is it the guy who's the best wrestler? Who was the most dominant? Is it the best story in terms of who had an unbelievable tournament and maybe defied expectations the other way? And I think we saw some of that. Certainly, the discussion back and forth, even talking to some other people in what the MOW award means. And that's state tournament, regions, districts, any old tournament during the season. I think a lot of people view that award very differently. So Joe, I'll throw it to you first. You have a vote there. I know you felt strongly one way. Is it really that much? It's in the eye of the beholder as far as what the OW award means?
Well, it is in the eye of the beholder, and it's in your thought process. And for me, you said it 2 ways: OW, outstanding wrestler, and MOW, most outstanding wrestler. And let me say this before I go on. There is no wrong answer when it comes to that award. Is Jaden James the most talented and best wrestler in that tournament? Without question. Is Paul Kenny the 2nd best wrestler in that tournament? Yes. But for me, it was who had the best 3 days. And when you look at that, in my opinion, it was Grayson Pettit. Again, just my 2 cents. Jaden James did exactly what he was supposed to do. He went in and dominated. Paul Kenny did the same thing. Tanner Hodgins did the same thing. Now, I voted Grayson Pettit 1. I voted Jaden James 2, and I voted Paul Kenny 3. So it's not like I ignored them. But, one of the veteran writers sitting a set of bleachers away from us after the first match when Pettit won, held up his Outstanding Wrestler Award ballot and said, you could fill this out right now. I spoke to 5 writers who have OW votes, one of whom is to my left, and all 5, assuming they were telling me the truth, voted for Grayson Pettit. That means there were 5 others. There has always been 10 voters, 5 from the media, and 5 who serve at the pleasure of the tournament director. And the word was that Grayson Pettit finished 2nd by 1 point. And it just kind of makes you scratch your head. So I'm sort of thinking the kid didn't end up on somebody's ballot, which is absurd. But, I have my times when I break my own rules. And I can tell you the times I have. 2006 with Mike Gray, 2011 with Andrew Completano, 2013 with Anthony Ashenall, 2016 with Nick Sirianno, all 4-time state champions. And had he not gone into the bleachers and got involved in a brawl on February 22nd, 2025, Anthony Knox from St. John Vianney, now of Rutgers, would have been unanimously the OW a year ago, but he wasn't. So, I just say this about Grayson Pettit, and maybe it's because I am a sports reporter and my job is to look for the best story. He was the best story in the tournament. He beat the 12th, the 5th, the 4th, the 1st, and the 3rd seeds. The guys he beat were 177 and 29. But let's face it, the voting is not a perfect process. Derek Jeter wasn't unanimously elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame, nor was Tom Seaver. So again, this is highly subjective. I just felt like it wasn't the right choice in my opinion. But again, how are you going to argue with Jaden James? Who knows how many NCAA titles that kid's going to win while he's at Penn State? And the same with Paul Kenny. So, it's just, from a guy who's voted for it for 40 years, it was just kind of stunning because 2 years ago, Sonny Amato, then a freshman, surprised the hell out of the whole Boardwalk Hall and was the OW. So, nice thing is you're allowed to have a different opinion.
And Joe, you mentioned just doing what he was supposed to do, Jaden James, that is. He pinned and teched all but one kid, and that one kid was Melvin Miller in the Ironman finals. And what did he do in the state tournament? He pinned and teched everyone. And I say this is Jaden James's biggest fan. I mean, I've covered him the last 4 years. He's been sensational since he was 113 pounds. So but what Grayson Pettit did to Anthony DeAndrea in that final, I mean, not even Vinny Anello did that to him in the Beast of the East finals. So the run that Grayson Pettit went on was absolutely ridiculous. And I feel like it kind of left a sour taste in all of our mouths that he wasn't the MOW, because I think right off the bat, he showed that. I mean, that was the first final of the night. Right off the bat, to me, he showed that he won MOW, but everyone else didn't think so. But I mean, it is what it is.
All right, we're in the third period now. We're down by one. Need to take down to close this one out. So let's get moving. Final takeaways of the season. Ryan, this is something you've been talking about all year. In a weird way, they kind of flew under the radar, but the team up in Oradell looks like they are back to being, what they've been for the last, decade plus. It's been a long time, but Bergen Catholic had a very impressive season.
Yeah, I mean, from start to finish, they were great. 2 champions to end it. And, by their standards, they broke a long drought of 3 years. Well, 4 years. Joe Kangro was their last champ in 2022. They get 2 champions in Joey Canova and Gideon Gonzalez. Gideon Gonzalez came down to 38 in the middle of the season, and he was awesome. He was absolutely awesome. Didn't lose at 38. Just a takedown clinic and pin clinic, really from when he made that decision to the end of the year. They got a couple more kids to the podium: Sauzy Say, Manny Gusfa, Anthony Rioto, and Matt Mulligan. Matt Mulligan, that's his second state medal, along with Sauzy Say. Rioto's a freshman, and we slept on Gusfa really all season. I'll put my hand up, at 65. I thought he wrestled better than some of the kids who were in the indie ranks for us towards the end of the season. He was a region 5th last year, really made some strides this year. And they have an amazing freshman class coming in. One of those kids being Dom Santoli's son, Nico. They're going to be an incredible team next year. A lot of these kids are coming back. They lose a couple seniors, but Del Barton, to me, is still the team to beat. They only lose a couple kids, one being Jaden, CJ Betts, another one. But yeah, I mean, it's Bergen's going to make this interesting again.
Speaking of Dom, real quick, that just reminds me, quick aside, we saw that somebody somewhere on social media did the all-Italian name team from all the New Jersey guys in the state tournament. Head coach Dom Santoli. That was pretty funny for anyone else who saw that out there. Well, we've talked about the PowerPoints a million times, but Joe, real quick, I know you feel strongly that's something that needs to be adjusted going into next season.
Well, and I certainly hope they're going to address it. Now, I've talked to a couple people. We have a coach here in the Shore who is very vocal about the PowerPoint system. And, The first thing that comes to mind is they had to fix the chart. Well, they may not have to fix the chart, but I think what they're going to need to do is they're going to need to up the number of matches count toward qualification. I think they saw 9 was too few. There were too many teams that had perfect scores based on their 9 matches, which was 42. If you up it by 11, you're going to drop some of those, essentially as batting average. You're going to drop some of those averages down. So I think that's going to be the thing. And let's remember, this is going to happen very soon. The wrestling committee gets together shortly after the season ends to work on these things. But the one thing, the PowerPoints, the chart, the number of matches that count toward qualification is not going to fix is sectional alignment. We cannot go through another season with Howell and Southern in the same section, and Phillipsburg and Mount Olive in the same section. You need to spread those teams out. And all I ask is that the wrestling committee think about it and do what's best for the sport, the kids, and especially the fans. All 5 of us know who should have wrestled in the Group 5 final and not in the sectional semifinals. Find a way to spread these teams out and allow the best teams to get to Rutgers. It will be better for wrestling and for the sport and the kids and the fans to see the best teams at Rutgers. And another one, and I know we would fight to the death, Delaware Valley can't be a Group 1 anymore. Group 1 is different than it was 20 years ago. These are mostly really small school, a lot of struggling programs. I mean, look what Del Val did to everybody in Central Jersey. So again, my thought, Bob, is please, when you sit down to think about this, do what's best for New Jersey wrestling.
Well said, Joe. And looking forward to next season. And this is kind of a, wrapping up this season and looking forward to next season. One of the big storylines was, the state tournament at Boardwalk Hall. Is it going to stay? It's going to go. Well, it's going to stay. Our Pat Lanny talked to NJSI AA Executive Director Colleen McGuire, and she reiterated that. But the question still remains about what's the season going to look like, because Boardwalk Hall signed a 5-year contract with the MAC for its basketball tournament. So we could see, a shorter season, potentially an earlier state tournament, maybe sometime late in February. So that could be an adjustment. I think talking to a bunch of coaches, I think all of us did. A lot of them said the season just felt a little bit too long. It ended a little bit later. It started certainly earlier than it has. I'm interested in your guys' thoughts on that. Anybody have any strong feelings on what a potentially, shorter season, earlier state tournament could mean?
Yeah, I think it definitely could go 2 weeks earlier, and part of the reason for that is, we're now starting the season essentially 2 weeks earlier than we were a few years ago when they had the set date, which was usually around December 17th, a couple days before the Beast of the East, and now, there are teams wrestling 8, 9, 10 days before that. So they've already kind of extended the season. It did feel very long. I think it would be a great idea to move it up. I mean, we also ran into spring season, for those athletes that do play spring sports and made the state finals. They missed their entire first week of practices there. And, for people that are interested in the college wrestling too, which, that used to be the states and the conference tournaments were always on the same weekend, and you were kind of pulled one way or the other. If you move it up 2 weeks, you get done right before a week before the colleges start. And, and then, if you have your favorite college teams that you follow or want to go to their tournaments, you can. So I think it would be a great idea to move it up. There was a reason that they added, a couple extra matches to everybody's match count this year because it was so long. It was this late years ago, and they moved it up for the reason that they felt it was running too late. So I think there's just too many reasons not to wrap it up at the end of February. It's still going to be a 3-month grind. But I think that's the perfect way to handle it going forward.
Joe, you got to unmute. You can make your final point here.
I would be in favor of it simply because it would give us 2 weeks less of lousy, crummy quads. all we see now are you know, what's become overly important to me is 100 career wins, and we're going out and we're wrestling teams where, you know, you'll travel 2 hours, but you'll forfeit 6 bouts, and you do it just so, you know, your kids can accumulate victories. So, you know, I would like to see, you know, dual meets start to have a little more importance, and I think they will if the season is 2 weeks shorter. You know, your conference tournament's going to be earlier, your districts are going to be earlier, your regions are going to be earlier, and I really don't think anybody's going to have a problem with the state tournament being earlier either.
We're just about, well, just a little over an hour now, so we're going to wrap this thing up with a couple quick points. Look, there's a lot to look forward to for next year. We touched on it earlier, but, you know, Ryan, anytime a wrestler, you know, is going to go for a 4th state title, that's going to be huge news, and that's what Cam Sonson's going to try to do next season.
Yeah, Coach Stoll mentioned it to me, you know, right as I was interviewing him, right after the match ended. He was like, you know, the clock, it starts now, right? So we're going to see if he can join, you know, Gray, Campolitano, Ashnault, Suriano, and Knox as the 6th guy to ever do it. It's a big mountain to climb. There's a reason only 5 kids have done it. And, you know, Cam Sons is going to get the chance to be the 6th one. And another stat here for you guys, 15 of the 28 finalists are back next year. And this senior class, you thought that 2 years ago was really good with Knox, Alessio Parrington, Luddington, Delegata. This one's going to be incredible. You have Paul Kenny, Sant, Amato, Hodgins, Coluccio, DeGeorge, Logan, Monticello, Little. All these kids are seniors next year. So the quality of wrestling next year, when we get down to Atlantic City, is going to be absolutely sensational. And I can't wait for it.
And then one guy I have to mention and is Sean Kenny of CBA. You know, the return of Sean Kenny for next season. I mean, Kenny was someone we forgot about most season. I mean, how could we not? He was injured. The IO commit, you know, he had a torn labrum. He had, I mean, by what he told us, he had labrum surgery yesterday. I don't know if that's still stayed official, but he told us St. Patrick's Day was having it. I mean, he was out all season. He came back for the non-public A semifinals and the final. Finished season undefeated at 2-0, but you know, you assume he's healthy and he's back in the lineup next season. That's an immediate state championship contender added to that CBA lineup. And another guy we throw into that lightweight discussion, that could be Cam Sons wrestling Sean Kenny with a potential 4th state title online. It could be Killian Coluccio going for a second against Sean Kenny. And those guys are good friends, grew up wrestling together. So that is a huge, intriguing storyline for me. He was 3rd in the state at 106 pounds as a freshman. Obviously nothing this year. He's going to come back as a junior, you know, looking to get to the top of that podium. And that's an interesting one. And, you know, Ryan, real quick, that's a good mention. Bill, Anthony Jackson of Paul VI. I mean, he was, you know, someone we looked at as certainly another medal contender, you know, the capability of going on the run. An injury knocked him out before the region tournament started, but that's someone else, you know, I think we're looking forward to being back next year and hopefully staying healthy all the way through. Bill, you got to unmute.
There we go. Sorry about that, guys. Trying to keep the background sound out. But yeah, listen. I mean, he's one of the most exciting guys to watch, and especially as a 215-pounder. Guys just don't have that kind of explosiveness. You know, that they don't pin people as quickly as Anthony Jackson does. And that was really disappointing. Was he going to win it? Probably not, right? I mean, especially with Tanner Hodges coming up. But, you know, he was 5th last year, and I think he could have fit into that. Again, he'd had a couple close matches with Tyler Palumbo. You know, it lost both of them. You know, I think they would have maybe been on, you know, seated against each other maybe in the quarterfinals, you know, if things have played out. But yeah, just, you know, he'll be back. And look, a lot of those guys graduate. I mean, we'll see where Tanner goes next year. I mean, I'm thinking he'll probably continue to get a little bigger and maybe go up again, but we'll see. But yeah, he's fun to watch, both on the football field, where he's a really good defensive lineman, and especially wrestling, and looking forward to seeing what he does in his final season.
So there we go. That is the 2025-26 New Jersey high school wrestling season. 3 months, countless matches, and it all came down to 7 boys team state champions, the first girls team state champion in Jackson Township, 14 boys individual state champions and 12 on the girls side. It was a wild ride, as always, from start to finish. And, I know I speak for everyone else here. And, we were thrilled to bring all those stories to you on NJ.com here on the Weighing In podcast. And it was a blast. And we're certainly looking forward to next year. We will enjoy the break because the wrestling season is an absolute grind, but it's fun and very rewarding at the end to tell all of those great stories that unfold each and every March down in Atlantic City. Hopefully the sun will be out soon. We can all get out and kind of, defrost a little bit because it's, we had that fake spring a little bit, but it's still pretty cold out there. As you see, Bill's in Cleveland, so make sure you head to NJ.com and catch his coverage of the NCAA Division I championships. Our Jersey guys, Rutgers, Rider, Princeton University, and certainly the other, New Jersey wrestlers, spread out throughout the teams down there. So we want to thank everyone for joining us every week. Listen to us talk New Jersey high school wrestling. It was a great time. We hope you brought you some entertainment and some information along the way. And we'll be back next season. We have some exciting stuff planned for our spring sports, so we hope you stick around and tune in for that as well. For Ryan Patty, Jacob Ferriet, Bill Evans, and Joe Zadalis, I'm Bob Batters saying thank you for tuning in today and all season on Weighing In, and we'll see you next time on NJ.com.